Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our Medical and Laboratory Business at Intertek. And today I am thrilled to be joined by a repeat guest, second time, our Medical Chief, Yiqing Liu. Hi, Yaqing, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, so happy to have you back joining the second time club. So just in case there's people who perhaps did not get an introduction to you on our first episode that we did together, maybe you can give a quick introduction to yourself, what you do here at Intertek, and how long you've been in the medical industry.
Okay, no problem. My name is Yiqing Liu, and I have been with Intertek since 2008, and now I am the Medical Chief Engineer for Intertek, and I'm also the active working group member of a standard committee, and you will see later for our discussions.
Yeah, so we're talking about a really exciting topic today, of course. As you mentioned, you participate very heavily in the working groups and the standard committees. And today we are going to be giving everyone a sneak peek into the new 60601 version of the standard. So I think maybe we should give a little bit of history for everybody, just thinking about the development of the fourth edition of 60601 and what prompted us to have this new version, this fourth edition of the standard that's going to be coming out.
This is because the third edition was published in 2005, and this standard has been used about 20 years now. Within this 20 years, there are a lot of new technologies that has been adopted by the medical electrical equipment development, for example, the AI and machine learning. But there was no requirement in the existing third edition standard. Therefore, it was a common agreement that among the medical electrical equipment manufacturers, testing labs, as well as regulations, that the new version of 60601 standard is needed.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting too, Yiqing, right? I think sometimes people forget that it has been such a long time, right? 20 years. So it really is time, as you said, with the advancements in technology, with everything I think that we've learned throughout the years, applying the third edition and then Amendment 1 and Amendment 2, I think there's a lot that, can be done to improve this new version of 60601. So the time is now, and you're heavily participating in the committee. So going to dive into some more specifics on the development itself. So we've had some discussions on the timeline, right? I know it's hard to pin it down or commit or say exactly what the proposed timeline is. They started with the framework discussions and now they've made some, overall decisions or maybe public information about when the standard will be published. So can you talk a little bit about those timelines and, what that expected date is for the final version of the fourth edition of 60601?
No problem. This 60601 fourth edition standard project was started in 2020. And the standard committee took 3 years to set the standard architecture requirement and the design specification requirement. Start from 2024, the committee is writing the standard now, and we are planning to have CDV1 in this year after May, and we are planning to have a CDV2 in 2027. And the final goal is to have a standard to be published in 2029. And there will be 3 years grace period for the countries afterwards to adopt the standard, and also for the Part 2 standard committee to rewrite their Part 2 standard to align with the new edition of 60601-1 fourth edition.
Yeah, so I think it's super interesting that you bring that up, Yiqing, right? I think people sometimes don't realize how much effort goes into these, right? How long it takes, right? Working since 2020 to get to where we are now to, put together the architecture and the framework, and now moving into all the working groups and committees with that deadline not really coming until, 2030, 2031, 2032. So I think it's important, for everyone, test houses, manufacturers, everyone who's participating, to understand that it really does take a lot of effort when you're combining all of the, knowledge and expertise from all of these different stakeholders into the development of a new standard.
Which is really true, actually.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's not easy, that's for sure. And when we think about that too, right? As you mentioned, you're a heavy participant in the working groups. And you sit on several, but we also have 12 total working groups involved. What are some challenges that come from having all of these different kind of assigned working groups and then aligning them together with their sections into what will become an overall cohesive standard?
I totally agree with you. To keep a consistency is the main challenge with 12 working groups work together. For example, we have to make sure that we use the same style to write the standard. And we also have to make sure that the standard requirement is not overlapping between the working groups. Therefore, the standard committee had AG50 working group, which is all the conveners participating every single week to make sure that the alignment is keep in step. So this is how we actually try to avoid this non-alignment and had an accident which probably is missing the requirement in the standard or repeating overlapping the standard, overlapping the requirement in the standard.
Yeah, so all the different working groups are off working on their own, right? A convener in each working group. And then, as you said, you guys as the conveners are getting together, working to make sure that there's alignment across all of these working groups who are then meeting at their own pace, meeting at different times, working on their specific portions, and then coming together via the conveners.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think one of the big things, you and I have both presented this now at a couple of sessions with some people from the industry and talking about this incorporation of the collateral standards into the general standard, which I think is obviously going to be a big shift, right? Everyone's used to having the collaterals separately, having, different documentation for those collaterals. So thinking about that, right, integrating the collaterals back into the base standard, what benefits do you think will come from that, right, from consolidating into a single standard rather than having the base and then all the collaterals that the manufacturers need to comply with?
It is, in my opinion, to have all the collaterals be integrated into general standard is a big challenge. But it will make the standard structure of a 60601 standard family more simple, since we only have a general standard and Part 2 standard, and also make the standard requirement actually easy to be read and implemented, since we don't need to jump from between the different standards.
Yeah, and I think too, another benefit, right, is, when there's questions of does a collateral apply to me? Does it not apply to me? Do I have to follow these requirements? Now all of the requirements will be within the base standard. So people will know, yes, of course, you need to comply with these requirements. They're coming from the standard. So there's a lot less chance for confusion or things getting missed, requirements getting missed. So I think that will be a big benefit as well, right, from a manufacturer perspective, as they're trying to go through and make sure that they're complying with all of the requirements, not having to worry about the different collateral standards and what exactly applies, because they'll have that all within one cohesive standard.
True.
Yeah. The other thing that has come up quite a bit, and I mean, obviously, this from reviewing people's information, and we've talked about this a lot, right, with this new idea of the single statement requirement, right, and the reduction of things that are either cross-references or referencing other, materials. So what is this idea behind this single statement requirement? I know we've talked a lot about it with some of the manufacturers in the sessions, but maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Thank you for asking this question, because this is one of the favorite of mine, because I personally think that one requirement, one sentence is to make the requirement simpler and clear to be interpreted and understand. And also, I think in order to avoid the reference back and forth, will also make the standard reader easier to follow the standard requirement. That's why I personally think this is one of the best change in the new edition of the standard. On the other hand, this one requirement, one sentence style will make the new standard eventually to be computer readable, which means we are preparing the database driven standard now.
Yeah, which I think, I mean, obviously it's going to be amazing when this comes to fruition, right? It's really exciting. There's a lot of work in the interim, right? Taking these two single statement requirements, right? And as you said, there's been, I think, a lot of frustration on the side of the manufacturers, right? You miss something in one of the requirements, so you don't fully, having multiple requirements within a single statement. Now, having that single statement, as you say, making it computer readable, which digitization, right? Everywhere that they're trying to move with the standard is going to be amazing for the future. So a lot of work for the working groups, a lot of work for the committee, but thinking about the future, right, and what that's going to mean is just going to be fantastic.
Yes, and also reduce the confusion because if you have a one big paragraph of requirement, you could actually misinterpret what exactly the requirement is. And now, if a one requirement, one sentence, that will be extremely clear for
Yeah,
the.
and we've seen that right from our side with evaluations, right? So we've seen that in real life. And so knowing that the goal is to make it easier for the manufacturers to go through the process is fantastic.
True, true.
Yeah. The other big change I think that we're seeing, which, when we had the transition from the second edition of 60601 to third edition, moving to that risk-based standard, moving to a process-based standard, right? There was a big transition for everybody from second to third. Now we see this new balance between type testing and risk management and how much is process and how much is going to be type testing. So I think this is an exciting one too. It's definitely going to be another mindset shift for the industry. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well, just looking at the balance of type testing requirements with risk management process requirements.
No problem. For this one, actually, I should start a little bit with the history because second edition didn't have a risk management concept in the standard requirement. But in the third edition, we introduced this new concept into the standard requirement, but we didn't have much experience on how to write a conformity check requirement. So we used a lot of risk management file review requirement as a conformity check, but this leads to everybody can do what they want to do. So in the fourth edition, the standard committee considered that our 60601 standard, which is a -1 general and all the collateral part 2 standard are type test standard. Therefore, the standard requirement conformity check should be testable as much as possible instead of using process requirement as a conformity check. So the final goal is to separate the test type standard and the process standard requirement. So our standard will be especially when our test lab use the standard to do the evaluation on the product. If the requirement conformity check is testable, then this test is more easy to repeat between the different test labs. So which actually leads to the product evaluation result will be more easy to be recognized in different countries all over the world. I think this is very important.
Yeah, especially as we're, moving towards this goal of global harmonization, right? And moving towards, that end and ultimate kind of idea that you could be testing in for global requirements. So it's going to be another big change, right? There's a lot that will impact both the test houses and the manufacturers, but it is a really exciting thing to see again, taking some of the learnings from the third edition and the First Amendment and Second Amendment and, the ways that is being incorporated into the fourth. So that'll be a really exciting one to see. When we think about the fourth edition Yiqing too, we talk about those deadlines and those dates that are going to be several years out. Are there things that we think manufacturers should be doing now or engineers who are designing products should be thinking about so that they are in alignment with the fourth edition? Or is it really just, going forward as usual with their product designs and just waiting until that standard gets published?
So my suggestion to our manufacturers will be these follow the standard development. For example, the best way of following is participate in the standard committee work and provide comments when the draft standard is open for commenting. But if you don't have time, if the manufacturer doesn't have time, then they can follow the standard development, summarize highlighted items and just like listening to our podcast.
Yeah, of course.
That will be my suggestion. So at this, and now if you expect your product will be go to the market after the standard publication, then you probably will have to think ahead and have the plan on how to comply with the new standard. And that's why it is very important to follow the standard development and make sure what is the change in the new standard.
Yeah, I think especially too, right, since it's giving a really long leeway, right? So as people are going through their design process and product planning, right, you know that the standard will be coming. There's a lot of time leading up to that. And so as you said, right, just so important to get involved in the standard committees if you're interested and or, commenting on those drafts and then, being in touch with people like us who are always happy to have conversations about the standard and what's coming and, really taking in all the information that you can and planning for the future. When we look at the future too, I think, it's really interesting you mentioned, and it's an exciting time, right, in medical device development. We see a lot coming with AI and machine learning. We've seen a lot. Cybersecurity, of course, has been a huge topic for us with medical products and devices. So how should manufacturers be preparing for this, knowing that these things are going to be incorporated into the fourth edition as well?
Since the cybersecurity, machine learning, AI requirement has been, implemented in all different industries. So there are already existing standard for cybersecurity, AI, and machine learning. Therefore, the TC62A Standard Committee, which is responsible for our fourth edition 60601 standard, decided to adopt those existing standard requirements for cybersecurity, AI, or machine learning in our medical standard. For example, for the security part, including physical security and cyber security, we will adopt a part of the requirement from IEC 60601-4-5 and ISO 81001-5-1. And for the machine learning and AI requirement, the AI testing will adopt the requirement in IEC 60601, IEC 63450 testing requirement. Therefore, our manufacturers should just keep following what is the standard requirement status and what will be the existing standard requirement be adopted by 60601 so that when they have such kind of feature for their medical electrical equipment, then they have to consider those standard requirements ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's something really important that you just mentioned there, Yaqing, which we haven't gotten into too much, but just this idea that the working groups are relying on existing standards and published standards and pulling requirements, right, rather than creating brand new requirements. So as you said, pulling from things like cybersecurity requirements from 81001-5-1, relying on, existing industry standards, things that are already published and pulling those into some of the things that they're being developed and worked on within the working group. So I think that's really, just a positive thing that the working groups have been doing as well to make things easier and more aligned, right, and more cohesive, which again is all part of the ultimate end goal, right? So even when we're thinking again, as you said, about this idea of fourth edition being an international requirement, right, to simplify global compliance, there's just a lot that's going into this from a very detailed thought process by the working groups and the conveners to make this a really streamlined approach. So do you have any thoughts on that from a global side, right? Again, we see groups like IMDRF who are really working to push global compliance, and now we see the standard committee is having kind of a similar goal. So is there anything you want to mention there related to looking at this new standard, this next generation of fourth edition, and how that will impact global compliance for a manufacturer?
In my view, our new standard will have a positive impact on medical industry, medical device industry. For example, the standard will be consolidated used on the one requirement, one sentence, which will make our standard more clearer and more easier to be understand. And the second thing is our standard is a type testing standard. So therefore, we will be concentrating on the conformity requirement be testable. which actually, again, as I said, this will make the product evaluation in the third-party test lab more repeatable because those conformity check is testable. And this can make the medical electrical equipment be recognized globally by the different country more easier. And the last one is you can see now when we are writing the standard, actually the medical electrical equipment manufacturers, the test lab engineers and regulation staffs, even the hospital professionals are participating in the standard writing. So therefore, everybody actually will have their voice be listened during the standard development. So by the time of standard publication, the consensus has been made. Therefore, the standard adoption will be much easier at the end. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a really exciting time, I think, for us overall, right? Just from an industry perspective, as you say, just thinking about all of these people coming together to add their own contributions, their own expertise, their own experience into this development of a new standard. It's just fascinating, right? Especially as we see the advancements in technology. So it's just something that, is really powerful when you think about the medical industry and all the different players and participants and how they're able to come together to put something, like this into practice. The other thing, speaking about, really cool evolution, you mentioned this, right, with this plan to eventually be a database-driven standard or a online type standard. So is there anything you can elaborate on with that or any more information you can give with that kind of future obviously it's not going to be right away, but what the forward thinking is with making this a database standard or how that might work?
This actually is the new feature I never thought about, but later I think this is an extremely good feature because when we have a database-driven standard, then the manufacturers can generate customized the standard for every of their product. Therefore, their product development process will be much easier because they have a customized standard requirement for that particular product. So this actually will be the best benefit that I think about the database-driven standard. Of course, now we cannot achieve this at this moment, but I believe that this will become true in the future.
Yeah, I could not think that this is any more innovative, right? It's so fascinating to think that you could, as a manufacturer, go in, put in your information, and basically develop a custom standard, as you say, per product that makes sure that your product is meeting its specific requirements. Using that in a database format, right, would be so fantastic. Thinking about, the old school way of PDFs of pages and pages and pages of requirements versus being able to really narrow that down and have something personalized to your product and for your different products. So that will be incredible to see over the next few years. Again, that's something that will take time, but to see that, come together in the future will just make such an impactful difference. And just to think about the efficiency that it will provide and how things will be able to move much faster, that's really impactful as well.
Yeah, and this actually will also benefit the test labs because as long as you put the correct features of the product, then you should generate the same, customized standard for that particular product itself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a lot less confusion over does this apply, does this not apply, right? You've gone through and been able to generate that based on the product and what it does. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, and I want to add a little bit more here. So any requirement which is not applicable to that product will be removed from the customized standard at the end. So which actually will save a lot of time for our engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to end on an exciting note. I know we talked a little bit about it and how excited you are about this new version of the standard. But of course, as mentioned, right, you're deeply involved in the working groups, sitting as a convener, right, participating on the different groups and working, with our Intertek group internally with all of our participants that we have on the standard committee. So when you think about this new version of 60601 and the impact that it's going to have on the industry, you mentioned some of these things just in terms of making it much easier on the test labs as well as the manufacturers. Is there anything else when you think about, obviously it's going to be a lot of your time over the next few years spending in these working groups and on these committees with this ultimate goal. So anything else you want to share or say about the future with 60601 4th edition?
I think there's a little bit of challenge about the new 4th edition. One of them is the new general standard will become very big because it will, integrate all the collateral standard into the general standard. Therefore, the general standard will be huge. I expect more than 1,000 pages. So for the organization, which is very small, or only have a single one person individual, party, then the financial burden could be the issue for them if the standard should be purchased to be used. So this is one of the actually concerns for the new 4th edition. But otherwise, I think the 4th edition new standard will have a positive impact for, benefit for everybody. And also, especially in the future, the database-driven standard, I really think this will be the new feature for the industry, especially for our design engineers and our testing lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Yiqing, it was so great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming back on. As we said, we are big promoters of the standard working groups and the committees, and we are actively participating. We know this is really important to the future of our industry, so we're excited to be participating in all of the different working groups. We will be bringing more information and keeping people updated on the changes that are coming and the things that are coming out of the working groups. We have a webinar that's available if you would like to go online and download that to learn more and go into some of the specifics from each working group. But as always, you can feel free to reach out and contact me directly if there are questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes, absolutely.